so I just want to flash up our logo. We're only allowed to use it on white, and on my side in grey. So I'll just put it up there for a second to please. A huge stump for us to have this special logo. Okay, so I'm going to talk today about the Sussex Humanities Lab in particular, and then try to talk a little bit around some of the questions over what we might call the post-digital research agenda in relation to the lab. It's kind of an impossible presentation. I was hoping the committee would grant me at least 3 hours to do my presentation, but it turns out I've only got about 25 minutes. So 78 slides, there's no way we can get them. I'm going to try and jump quite quickly across so many things, and that was a cut down version as well. So much to talk about as we gather information as part of this project. And I should say it's a very exciting project in terms of the kind of scope and the kind of connections it's making. What I want to do really is give a quick overview of the lab for those who don't know anything about it really, show you a few photos, etc. Then what I want to do is run through some kind of contextualisation about some of the issues around the digital humanities which people may not be so familiar with. Then to talk a little bit maybe about kind of theoretical sort of framework around how the lab's been positioned as an intervention into what we're calling critical digital humanities. And then finally, which I almost certainly won't get to, but it would be nice to, because there's some really great photos in the British Library, talk a little bit about the materiality of the digital, and maybe raise that question of the lab and why the use of the word lab is interesting in our kind of particular historical constellation we're in. Clearly, this is completely impossible, but it looks good. So, going by post-digital, by post-digital, it's kind of an interesting term. It has various connotations. It's used in various articulations. For example, in talking about the way in which there's a kind of return to the analogue, or a kind of move beyond discrete sampling, and sort of questioning that question of what Stiegler calls grammatization. Perhaps in other articulations, particularly around the notion of the glitch or the new aesthetic, and various post-internet type articulations of the post-digital, this notion of seams and artifices that really are quite revealing about the digital as digital, and perhaps problematise this kind of smoothness associated with kind of previous conceptions of cyberspace. It's also articulated, and this is particularly in my work, I think, as a kind of historical phase coming after the digital, right? This is how, for example, Alex Galway in his work talks about the non-digital, to think about the digital really as a particular historical moment, and perhaps we really should think about taking that into account and thinking about, for example, digital humanities, digital media, digital economy, and all these kind of contextualizations and problematics that are associated with them. Fourthly, and this again is a very important issue for the lab, I think, is this question of the rematerialisation of digital technology, the return of materiality, the material term more widely in terms of the theoretical literature, and I think crucially, the penetration of the computational digital technology into the environment in a very radical way, such that it's often claimed, for example, that we're living in a kind of post-screening age. The computation doesn't necessarily have a representational form as such through screening mediation. And that raises lots of interesting questions. Point towards, for example, Rob Kitchen's work, which is very interesting in regard to the urban spatiality and spatialisation of computation itself. And lastly, really, a way of kind of dealing with the problematic in any kind of, I think, digital-oriented work of the kind of fetishisation of newness and what's sometimes called upgrade culture, and how we kind of deal with these kind of problematics of, for example, new media. You know, what's new about the media, or the new aesthetic? What's new about this kind of particular new aesthetic? Okay. So, as I won't be able to get through all this, if you are interested, these are one not so recent, 2012, books that talks about this kind of general contextualisation of the digital humanities, which you might find interesting. And this is a new piece of work that's coming out in May, on particularly over the question of post-digital. It's an empty collection. It's got a great bunch of people who are contributing to it. and really raising that question of post-digital through articulations of aesthetics and the return of aesthetics as kind of a theoretical question more generally. Okay, so the Sussex Mental Lab. So, as Tim's already laid out, I think there's this kind of notion of we're in a kind of moment of reconfiguration, some kind of revolution, some kind of transformation. And the Sussex Humanities Lab is Sussex's response to the kinds of questions that this is throwing up. Not just in terms of a kind of acceptance of these questions, but a problematization and questioning of the very grounds of making those kinds of claims, I think. This includes issues more generally in terms of, say, managerial university, neoliberal university, questions of the reconfiguration of the university. People often talk about the digital as a kind of acid that dissolves the disciplinary boundaries, which can be very interesting, very productive, of course, in terms of interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary research, but obviously it also marks it out as quite useful as a managerial tool of control of academics in university structures. So it has a very interesting dynamic to it. Also, the idea of different kinds of objects, when mediated, allows certain kinds of transcoding between different disciplinary boundaries. I think it's a very interesting question, and raises lots of interesting issues in relation to artifacts and materiality and so on and so forth. And the question then is about, well, how do we respond to these changes? What does it mean, for example, for questions of memory, the archive, for questions of practices in relation to research itself and research methodologies and research methods, and how indeed we publish, right, more generally in academia, and how that really problematizes perhaps the monograph, the journal article, and so on and so forth. Which are generally, I think, very standard kind of digital humanities questions as well. So it's a kind of interesting kind of range of questions. Just to give you some context to the scale of our project, or programme as it's more properly referred to. It's a 4-year programme, £2.9 million, and it's a strategic investment by the university in 3 themes. The first is, of course, big data, the one that gets all the money. Big data and cultural critique, as we've termed it. Memory, and lastly, changing materials. And to do this, we had to somehow weave this into the kind of university structures, and as a result of that, we have these kind of 4 strands that draw in various ways from these 3 themes, in particular projects and programs underneath the strand leaders. So the project itself, the PI is Caroline Bassett, who's not here because she's currently on research leave in Finland. But the other 4 strands are digital archives and Tim. 2 is the digital media competition culture, that's me. 3 is digital technologies, digital performance. You can see digital is quite a lot in these strands. Sally Jane Norman. And lastly, Rachel Thompson's doing the kind of more digital sociology, I think, but called digital lives, memory and experience. And the idea really is that it is a truly cross-school project, and it is meant to tie different schools together in different kinds of programs and different kinds of activities. Here's some wonderful photos. Me looking particularly glum. Caroline created this, so I don't want you to translate it. But anyway, you can see that's the main street, strand leaders, and of course Caroline in the middle there, who's the artist. Okay, so just to give you how this money is spent, this is translated into particular posts, essentially, so mostly spent on people. So there are, of course, us at the top there, the directors, and then we have 4 lecturer A's, equivalent to assistant professor, and Albert Webb, I think he's here, there's Albert. Albert's our first appointee as one of the lecturers, and the others are currently being advertised as we speak. 3 lecturer B's are also being advertised and have not yet been filled. There'll be 6 postdocs, with 1 situated in the library and 1 in informatics. 5 PhD studentships, could be 6, but we're going with 5 at the moment. And then finally there'll be a project manager who has been appointed, an administrator to be appointed, and a technician to be appointed. So there's a lot of new people, as well as hopefully bringing lots of other people from the university in kind of activities to get involved in. I'm not going to really go through this, but the idea really is to kind of address many of the questions called for by the digital humanities, by the question of the digital in the university, and the way in which knowledges are reconfigured in various ways. The great thing I think about the programme is it isn't, it seems a really ridiculous thing to say in terms of traditional digital humanities, as if there's a tradition when it's such a young area, dating only from about 2001. But nonetheless, digital humanities itself, which comes out of computing humanities, does have a particular approach to producing tools and archives, and has very much understood itself within those terms. What's fantastic about the way in which the programme has been set up at Sussex is its explicit attempt to link together many different approaches and styles, knowledge and method and so on and so forth. This is just a very kind of, I feel like this together, that's why it's so software studies-ish. But there is a whole range of approaches that we want to bring in, which we don't think necessarily has to problematise what it is to do digital humanities research. It widens and it kind of really strengthens the kind of research you do. And this is this notion of, I suppose, kind of critical digital humanities that's kind of informed by many of the strengths I think we have here at Sussex in terms of materiality, material return, medium specificity, cultural critique, computation writ large, but also networks, archives, history, performance practice, and so on and so forth, right? And that's really the kind of specificity that makes it, I think, internationally distinctive in relation to other digital media centres. As part of this, one of the great things is that we actually have a physical space which has been given to us by the School of Media, Film and Music, the Digital Humanities Lab itself, which is a highly customisable, world-class audiovisual kind of maker space, installation space, big white rectangle that you can do various things in. It's in the second floor of Silverstone. It's currently under construction, has been under construction for quite a while. But the idea really is that various kinds of activities can take place in this space. It's due to finish the 25th of April, but as I said here, it's always been 5 weeks away from completion since January, so I've lost confidence in that. But at some point soon, hopefully we'll have it and we can do exciting things there. We were supposed to actually run this event in the space, but unfortunately not. This is a little map of the space, and the orange breakout just shows you how it's organised. So it's approximately 60 square metres, and a storeroom is back there filled with all sorts of wonderful technological equipment to be rolled in and used to customise the space itself. And we're also quite lucky, you can't really see the green over here, but we also have this external area as well, which massively increases the range of things we can do. Plus, there's also a big grassy area, so we can have nice events outside as well as in the inside space. It's a really nice environment. Okay, just show you quick photos. This is what it looks like. If I had more time, I'd show you photos from January, which are humorously identical. Not a lot really has happened. I think the only thing that's happened is that red did. And this is the close-up to that outside space. This is the inside space. You can see they're starting to sort out the walls, put the electric fit, and these wonderful hand things that are on the roof, which is a nice feature that I'm asking to keep if possible. So yeah, this is space again. Right, okay, great. So that's our space. What we want to do over these 4 years really is to turn to and explore in various different registers and various disciplinary approaches the kind of question of the digital through and how can I say, both through disciplinary formations, I would say, but also in kind of interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary formations, right? And some of these various ways of articulating this have been, for example, of course, digital humanities, which is the one we are choosing to use here, but you also see digital sociology, computational social science, digital studies, which has a much wider usage in France. Bernard Siegler uses that quite widely to talk about the new ways of understanding the digital and actually subsumes digital humanities under that. But But essentially what we want to do is think about the digital in relation to these various formations and the various ways in which one might undertake various kinds of projects. Now, although this is a kind of more explicitly theoretical presentation, there are also empirical projects. We do still want to do the kind of traditional digital humanities projects, kind of big technical projects, and part of that is actually having the technical capacities in the new staff in order